Boruto episode 30, the Sharingan versus the lightning blade Kiba the Fang. This, I would say, was definitely a great episode. With it being the 30th episode, I don't know if they were like, hey, let's make it sort of a great milestone sort of episode. We're in the 30s now. But it was really good. They didn't really focus much on the story. There's definitely a lot of dialogue, but it wasn't like a big deal. We still have the three people going up against Chojuro, and they're just talking, like taunting him and stuff like that. We have Iwabe show up towards the end, and he just spouts some lines to do with the paper bomb blade. He spouts a couple lines. Nothing was really like significant at all in this episode as far as dialogue, outside of maybe Kagura, where he tells Shizuma, like, I'll fight Boruto, and that's pretty much it, because of course that leads into the next episode, which is Boruto and Kagura. But the main focus on this episode, I was glad it actually was the main focus, because I was worried that it was going to be called like the Sharingan versus the Lightning Blade, and it wasn't really going to be that much of a focus, but it definitely was, and it was a great battle. It was actually really fun. All the action, I think, was actually really entertaining. Like, even when they would cut to Chojuro, and Boruto did like a tiny little bit, he was like kind of fighting, and he threw his kunai, and that was about it as far as action for his character. He was hardly in the episode, really, but it was actually pretty cool. Like, Chojuro fighting against the three people. I was happy to see that he got himself out of that situation, because I felt like they were just going to do kind of the typical thing where, someone ex machina's their way there at the last second, especially because we had like 4 different people headed in that direction with Iwabe, Mitsuki. I guess Inojin and Shikadai aren't actually going, because they do the flashback with Suigetsu and Mitsuki takes off, but I guess Inojin and Shikadai were like, never mind, and they just decided not to go because they weren't running alongside him or even behind him or anything, so maybe they won't end up being in the battle at all. But I thought it was cool. It's like, alright, Chojuro actually ends up escaping himself. Has a really cool moment towards the end when the woman with the short one with the needle blade throws it at him, and he gets stabbed in the arm, and he like runs through it to take her down. And it was cool. Like, he took everyone down without actually killing them too, which I thought was great. Like, he hits her with the back of the blade, because even if it was, the blade was broken, he could have stabbed her if he wanted to, but he hits her with the back of the blade and knocks her unconscious. He takes out the other dude with Zabuza's blade. I can't even think of the actual name anymore, but he takes him out, and he like almost does like a wind slice on his head, because he splits his headband open and he knocks him unconscious with that. And I was like, well, that was really cool. Like, he went through this whole moment, and he's able to, once he was able to get his katana, he cut the wires, and that's when he, fights back. And then the big guy just gave up, because he was like, do you want to keep going? I have half a blade, and I just took out 2 people. And he's just like, I'm sorry. And he just puts his weapons down. So I thought that was funny. But I was like, that's actually really cool. Like, seeing him, legitimately escape. And he was actually very cool. Like, that was probably that's definitely one of the coolest moments he's had as a character, even with all the stuff he did during the Great Ninja War, because that was like, it's meant to be everybody's, showcase moment. But I was like, this is just like a smaller moment, and he was completely trapped too. It wasn't like they were just in a battle, he did some epic moves. He was completely trapped. Like, they had him trapped for most of the last episode, and it was just like, man, this is actually really cool. So I was happy to see that, he made his own escape. And then during that moment, when the guy was like, okay, so he was able to beat him, but I'm going to end it with my blade and just, toss a bunch of paper bombs. Iwabe shows up, and of course we knew he was going to make it there, and he's using his staff. He does the mud wall, and he starts dealing with the guy until they're fighting, and the guy runs at him, and we find out that this whole time that staff has actually been a katana, which I thought was super cool, and it made total sense. Once he did it, I was like, it kind of blew my mind. I was like, oh crap, that was a blade this whole time? And then I was like, that actually makes perfect sense, because of what we saw with the students. Like, anyone growing up in the Hidden Mist Village trains in Kendo. And I was like, oh man, that totally makes sense, because he was, if we're going by what we saw during the episode where Naruto became Hokage and they did the little flashback thing, Iwabe was kind of thrown in there, because that's not in the manga, but he was thrown in there. It's like, okay, he was still really young when that happened, but it's like, it makes sense that he would still have that training from his parents who grew up and they use blades. It's probably, considering how it looks, because I always just assumed it was a staff. I also, because of the way he utilized it, I thought it was like, okay, this is a chakra staff, just like, I mean, we've seen it like a million times, but like the biggest example would be like Asuma with his chakra blades. So I was like, okay, that's definitely what his weapon is. It's still a useful weapon even as a staff. But then he pulled out the blade and he takes the guy down. They do like the full samurai move and everything. And he's like, this is how you're supposed to use a sword. And they have him doing like the pose with the blade sticking out, and you see the guy behind him collapse. And I was like, that was actually pretty cool. So, well, he's supposed to collapse, but he doesn't end up collapsing, because he actually uses all of the paper bombs on the blade, and it's just a huge explosion. And that was one of the things I liked, the way they transition. It would be like one big thing happen, and then it would transition to the next. So that was the only time we see Iwabei, and then the big explosion goes off, and we don't really know what happened. I'm sure he lived. That'd be a crazy way if that was how they decided to fix how he's not in the Boruto movie and stuff. Like, he died there, that'd be nuts. But I thought that was actually really cool. I was like, okay, so that's actually a blade. And technically, I would have to assume it's still, the blade, or at least the sheath itself, is still technically a chakra staff, because he's able to use it that way. So, unless he's just like insanely skilled where he can just control it like that and just send his chakra through the staff, even as it's just a normal, staff. Unless he's that insanely powerful, which I don't think is even a thing. That's just like flat out manipulation. That's like he's just an earthbender at that point. But unless that's the point, it's still a chakra staff, but it has a blade, underneath it. So I think that's actually really cool. And I was like, oh man, I would love to see that get utilized a lot more if he started to actually, utilize the blade. Although I doubt we'll see that too often. I think that was just kind of like that epic reveal moment where like he's had this whole time, and he ends up using it against, one of his own people, in a sense, because he's from the Hindenburg village. So I thought that was actually a really cool moment. And of course, like I said, they're jumping back and forth between the different battles. And then we have our main battle, which is Sarada facing against this woman. Of course, I don't remember any of the other people's names. It's just Kaga and Shizuma. But she's basically facing off against the lieutenant of Shizuma, who is the woman with the two lightning swords. And I love the fact that they go through her backstory for like a split second. She's like, you don't know anything about me and stuff, and my father was this person who, Naruto killed, except he didn't know that I was his daughter. And I was like, yeah, I'm sure none of these people knew, because all these people are just randomly popping up, and it's like, yeah, I'm related to this person, so I'm sure he didn't know. But I thought it was cool. It was a great fight, actually. They had some really cool moments. I think one of my favorites had to be when the woman like jumps over Sarada. Just animation wise, it looked great, because it was like, this 2D. It was a great blend of 2D and 3D, because the ground itself was technically 3D as it was spinning, but the characters, of course, were 2D. And they did a slow motion shot, and it was a long slow motion shot. I'm like, that probably took a minute to have like that perfect animation where like it's just barely turning around on these characters, but it looked really cool. That was a great shot, and just the fight itself was really good. And Sarada's going through using her Sharingan, and this woman is like, throwing these blades around and stuff, like she's controlling them. She's got the lightning armor, and Sarada had to get close, and she was really good at the fight too, because it started off in there at a distance and she can't see with all the mist. And she goes through the fight and it's like, all right, I have to find some way to get to this woman, because if I can get to her, I can see her do her moves, and then I can copy her jutsu. One thing that she does do, Sarada does, is she utilizes Boruto's jutsu, which was great. It was like a bit of a callback to that episode when she copied it for the first time. And it was like, man, I gotta admit, Boruto's jutsu just saved my life right there, because she was able to distract the little lightning shark. And I was like, that's actually really cool. And like, it's just a small little callback, her being able to utilize that to, at least make one clone. So like, that's actually pretty sweet. So I love that for sure. And then the way that she handled the woman, where it was like, all right, I have to basically just charge her. Like, she kind of hit her with some of the distractions and stuff, and then she just charges right at her. And she hits the, the hand sign. She's doing the jutsu, and Sarada's running right at her, and she's able to finally see it through the mist. And so she copies it at the perfect moment, and then she's got her jutsu. And so she's able to like copy everything, and then she totally screwed up, because I think when she first copied it, that's when Sarada tried to do the genjutsu on her. She's like, oh crap, and she backed up again, and then they were going through back and forth, and the woman, that's when she like amped her chakra up using the blades, and she did like the lightning armor thing, which I thought was interesting that Sarada was able to copy that, because I thought it had to be. I mean, it's been so long since like the first original definition of what the Sharingan could do, but I thought for sure it had to only, like, you could only do it if it was like hand sign stuff. And I guess technically what she did was a hand sign. I mean, it wasn't like multiple, it was just like the one sign. So I guess that was how she was able to get it, because they don't really show how she copied it. It was just like, because she was pretty far away, she could see that she was doing it, so I guess that was all it took. It was like, she just had her hands, I feel like she didn't even do anything, she was just, standing there, but she may have just been doing like that generic hand sign they do. And that may have been all it took to copy it. She just had to get close enough to be able to kind of use that, because she doesn't just naturally have lightning chakra. But I thought that was really cool. She's able to get the armor, and they're, clashing and stuff. And then that's when the story elements come up, where it's like, when she goes into, you don't really know what I dealt with because I never knew my father and things like that. And Sarada's like, you're not the only person who's had like a rough upbringing because of their parents. And it's like, you know nothing about me. And then when they're clashed, Sarada hits her with the genjutsu, and I was like, well, that was really cool. And you could tell that she was hit too, because when they, that was the second time, she was like, oh, and she tries to back up. She's standing in the middle and looking at this moon, and then they do a flashback, and I was like, well, she's caught in the genjutsu. And I like the way they played it, because honestly, I'd say that was closer, it was like a little bit after the halfway point in the episode, I would say. And then there was still a lot to the episode, because they were jumping between all the fights. And I kind of forgot that she was hit with the genjutsu myself, because they were jumping through. And it seemed like, oh, maybe she wasn't affected as long as we thought as long as we thought. I figured somehow she was able to kind of break her way out of it, because of just whatever. Like, the time had passed, and it was like, she was caught in the genjutsu for a second. Sarada wasn't able to kind of make the killing blow at that time. So we were, still kind of going through it. And that was not the case. She was caught in that genjutsu, and that is all there was to it. Like, the rest of that fight, as sweet as it was, none of that was real in any way, shape, or form. And it was actually very cool. And they were going through a lot of different stuff. And I was like, that was actually really cool. Like, she was officially caught the whole time. And I love the way it ended, too, where it was like, she went through, she thought she finally got Sarada and, like, decapitated her and stuff. And then the body, like, washes away, and she's like, what in the world? Is like, she's been calling that genjutsu the whole time. And it was like, why do you think you couldn't see through the mist? And then the genjutsu goes away, and then the mist actually comes in. And that was a part of it where it was like, I'm kind of confused as to what is and is not a part of the genjutsu thing, because they did have Sarada after she did that genjutsu thing, after they did the flashback and stuff. That was when Sarada figured out, oh, there are bubbles, because the lightning shark was going beneath her, and it was making bubbles. It was making hydrogen, oxygen. So I was like, all right, that was real. So when did that actually take place? Because it was like, she clearly actually found out that happened, but it was like so much time with the genjutsu. It was like everything after that should have been fake, but that was like the one real point where she realized, oh, this is happening. So it was kind of weird that they threw that in there, because I'm like, that had to be an actual moment for Sarada's character, but everything else was fake. And so it could have just been that she was running from the actual shark, because it was like, even with the woman trapped, she still had to, figure out, how am I going to, get out of this situation and beat her before my chakra runs out, basically, because of her using the Sharingan still. So it was kind of weird that it was thrown in there, and that's why I kind of forgot, because I was like, okay, all the stuff that Sarada is saying when she's by herself must be real. That's why I thought she wasn't in the genjutsu anymore. But it was like, that's weird. She was caught in there the whole time, but at some point, Sarada did realize, like, oh, the bubbles and stuff, and the mist comes in, and she's standing on the wall. It's like, the bubbles, forming up are these two elements, and that's kind of bad for you. And she just drops the paper bomb. I was like, oh, she's trying to, like, murder this woman. But naturally, there's a big explosion, but the woman still lives, because it's just a bunch of water. So she passes out, and, ultimately Sarada won. And it was a great fight, and then, naturally, it was exhausting, so she passes out as well. But it was a really good episode. Like I said, I love the action in it. It was a really good action episode. It was not focused on the story. I'm sure we'll be getting that. We have the main character as well as the character who's dealing with the emotional conflict. So next week will probably be like 75% talking, 25% action. It really depends on what happens with the other characters fighting. Like, pretty much the other three people that Chojuro were fighting, they're taken out. Sarada won her battle. Iwabe probably survived, but the other guy, I would have to assume, died. Like, the whole point was him sacrificing himself, so he has to be dead. And then you have Shizuma who's still left, so maybe Shizuma and Chojuro will end up fighting, and then Mitsuki will come in, somewhere towards the end of the next episode or something like that. But when you got the main character and the person with the emotional issues in an anime, typically there's a lot of talking. So we should probably expect how this episode went for action, probably the exact opposite in the next episode, which is pretty much most episodes where it's mostly talking and like a little bit of action. So we'll see how it plays out, but this was definitely a great one. I loved all the different action sequences. It was great to see Sarada have the focus of like the main battle, and it was something that really challenged her, and her getting to use the Sharingan, like an early battle of her using the Sharingan, was actually great. So I loved everything about this episode. It was even better than I thought it was going to be, with the way the combat looked and how every battle was actually entertaining. It wasn't like this battle was kind of boring because they're talking too much. It was like, no, I'm curious what Chojuro was going to do, and ultimately it was really cool. Iwabe came in with a surprise attack. Like I said, they did the Boruto Conqueror thing just to set that up for the next episode, so there wasn't, that much there. But all the action was definitely good, so I'm looking forward to the next episode, even though I don't think it'll be as cool as this one, because I don't think it'll be like just a great action episode. But I was glad we had this, because I mentioned last week, I was like, I want us to have a great action episode. We haven't really had one in a while. We have our fights, but I would say this was a great action episode. It wasn't like one move in particular was just like, holy crap, that was amazing. But they definitely had some great stuff in here. I did love, like, everything Sarada did, I did love, especially when she was able to first trick the woman and get close enough to copy her jutsu. I was like, that was really sweet. That was a cool moment. And then just seeing Sarada fight in general, with this being like really her first big battle where she's solo, I really did love that, especially with it being her first giant solo battle with the Sharingan. Like, her versus Boruto was like, sure, but this was legitimately life or death. So I love the way they handled it, and I thought all the action was great. So, looking forward to the next episode, but of course, would love to know what you guys thought about this one, so please comment below, let me know your favorite parts about it, your least favorite parts about it, and I would love to know what you guys think is going to happen in the next episode, how things are going to play out with Boruto and Kagura and Shizuma and Chojuro, because I feel like that's kind of where it's left at right now. Like, the only person really left outside of Kagura, as far as the villains, is Shizuma. Technically the big guy, but I don't think he's going to be fighting against Chojuro, because he got freaked out. So, unless he decides to kind of pick his weapon back up and team up with Shizuma to take on Chojuro, it's just going to be Chojuro versus Shizuma, and we'll get to see that play out as well. So that's my theory for how they're going to do the next episode, just because the pairings work. But I could be wrong. Who knows when Mitsuki will show up and how that'll change the dynamic. But we'll let you know your theories on how things are going to play out in the next episode as far as action and dialogue, all that stuff. And like I said, we'd definitely love to know what you guys thought about this episode, so please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.